That's really interesting. Let's talk specifically about that technique. How do you design suspense in music?
So suspense is like a more confounded or blended emotion that contains elements that are fear, elements of hope as well, anticipation, and tension that builds also anxiety. So if you look at the three different types of principles that we have discussed in rhythmic entrainment as part of evolutionary elements or principles, you could use a beat in the music that is above the resting heart rate, and that will create a kind of anxiety and uncertainty in the music. Then you also have brainstem reflex, that is another evolutionary principle, and this has to do with things that automatically we reject. And this could be very high levels of dissonance or extreme registers and things like that. So you can include a bit of that. Obviously, you don't want to include very high levels of dissonance or extreme registers if you just want to cause suspense, but you can add a little bit of that, kind of adding elements of instability, things that you are expecting to resolve, and that is going to create a bit of tension and anxiety. And then if you start looking at musical expectancy, anything, for example, where there's no clear expectations. So if you have, for example, an antecedent that doesn't have clear direction and you don't know where it's going to resolve, and you keep repeating that, that is going to create some kind of suspense as well. Or melodies that keep ondulating and don't have a clear direction to go and resolve. Those kind of things as well. Then you have more cliches, things like pyramidal chords, where you combine a lot of these elements, where you build dissonance over time, you build dynamics over time, you increase also the tempo over time, and that little by little brings tension and fear elements with the dissonance. And then if you go to associative elements, there are some nice examples in music. For example, there is an example on the music from Lalo Schifrin in Cincinnati Kid, where he actually uses the metaphor of a clock to suggest the passing of time and how that passing of time is actually associated to suspense, because it's building tension without having a definite conclusion. So that's basically how you can start looking at the different principles and just coming up with ideas. These principles are quite generic, so it's not telling you specifically use tonal music or atonal music. Or obviously, some types of musical styles can be ideal for some of these things. For example, atonal music is very good to create melodies that don't go anywhere because we don't have the kind of functionality that you have in tonality. So you can then apply these principles to actually select maybe music from that uses different tonal idioms and put it together.
Excellent. Um, which emotion was the hardest to analyze musically, and why?
I think probably the most difficult emotions is when you have complex, confounded emotions, because most of the research and most of the things we learn about music and emotion relate to the five basic emotions. So things like tenderness or happiness, sadness. But once you start bringing more complex emotions and that actually contain five or different emotions combined, then that becomes more complex, because then you need to add elements of all of them at the same time. And for that, you need to start looking at the texture of the music and see how actually you can distribute maybe different emotions in different layers. There is a very nice example in one of the films from where the music is from Jay Chataway, that is called Maniac. from the 80s. It's a horror movie. And he actually, the opening title music for that movie combines a very sweet flute melody that seems to suggest kind of like kind of tenderness or pity, a bit of pity maybe, nostalgia, but at the same time the harmonies that are played in combination with that melody are actually quite dissonant. And then basically you are combining now very dissonant harmonies with a very consonant melody, and that brings the kind of more the horror side of the story of the main protagonist, combined with actually the music wants the audience to feel that something is not right, but at the same time you should feel kind of empathy for the main character of the movie. And those kind of things I think become quite complex to analyze and come up with this kind of blends.